Hello, everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG cluster lifecycle cluster API release team SIG, no, CI signal team meeting for February 12th. We are abiding by the CNCF code of conduct, so raise your hand if you need to talk, though it's just a few of us this morning, so I think we'll be fine. Yeah, be cool to each other. Um, I'm recording this and we'll put it on YouTube afterwards. All right, so most people couldn't join this morning. That's understandable. It would be good to know if we need to change the time, but since this is the first week that like three people have had to cancel, it's probably just a one-off. Not a lot of things to discuss today, so let me go over my two quick updates, and then we can talk about um, whatever you want. So, first off, this week a failing test popped up on the 1.7 branch of Cluster API. And that failing test, I've got a Slack thread linked here and an example failure log from the failure here. And if we go to it, uh, basically it tries to run the conformance tests on 1.7, but fails to even get a cluster to come up. Um, the If you read through the Slack thread, you'll see some of the info there. But the long and short of it is that the cluster comes up and it's like a 1.31 cluster, but then it tries to start some 1.30 version of like the API server, and Kubernetes like, no, you can't do that. And so it says just errors out, and then everything fails. Stephen Cahill has looked into this. I've looked into this. We don't see any differences in the code, in the version of Kubernetes, in the version of the CI scripts from before this error started versus after it started. We don't see anything telling it to run the wrong version of Kubernetes. Everything looks like it's starting up the correct version of Kubernetes and that all the requisite components inside should be the correct version. So I'm completely stumped. Um, I think I'm waiting to see if there's any. Well, I'm not going to be waiting much longer. I'll probably open an issue on this, though I imagine the decision is going to be we don't care because it's 1.7 and we're about to deprecate 1. Well, that 1.7 is deprecated. We're about to drop support entirely for it. So, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't debug this as long as the error remains isolated to 1.7. But yeah, if anyone wants to dig into that some and can figure that out, I would appreciate it. Um, but I've spent hours and hours and I'm gotten nowhere on it. Um, Anything I found that looked interesting, we've proven was not the issue. So there's that thing. Um, there was another set of issues where we had some jobs flake out because we hit Google rate limiting while pushing they weren't end-to-end tests, so it's not really us for this release cycle, but they were um, continuous integration jobs for Cluster API flaking out a bit, and it was due to Google rate limiting the image pushing, or at least talking to the Google Container Registry in our jobs that push up the Cluster API images on a periodic basis. They do compiles of the current version and push up. Um, while investigating that, where we found there's not much we can do other than like, chill out and maybe not get rate limited. Um, so there's a couple. Yeah, so like the rate limit error might show up, but it turns out the build still works and it still pushes it up eventually. But it does result in an error in the logs. Anyway, while debugging all that and finding out that this error is maybe spurious and we need to do something to get that off of the dashboard in the future, we did discover a change that we could be making to make the error logs for those jobs a little bit easier to read. Um, and that would be, if I could demonstrate, that's the wrong browser. Um, do, 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 do. Copy link and boop, boop, boop. And assuming you can see this on my screen. Um, okay, Arc, I want to go to this address, please. I don't. Oh, Arc, Arc, please. It's really gonna just not open this as a browser link, is it? Come on. There we go. Okay, so instead of getting this error message for the push cluster or post cluster API push images job, where we just get 14 lines, an error, and no details about what happened, the change that I'm proposing in this PR will make it so the actual details will show up in this log right here on the little Prow dashboard instead of being buried inside this build log. Which, like, all the good stuff's down in here. This is where you can see the rate limits, and you can see that it actually ends up succeeding anyway. And so it'd be nice to have all that at the top level where you actually go to review the log. So, long story short, that fix is to make that happen. And it is just a feature of Prow jobs that I think didn't used to exist and now does. And Cluster API just never updated their CI jobs to make use of it. So hopefully that's straightforward enough. Changing a small setting to make the logs appear in standard out so that the Prow dashboard gets them directly. And that's the end of my discussion topics. Does anyone want to talk about anything, pairing, anything else?
First of all, awesome. Like this is great. I only looked at the first issue a little bit, and I asked the question in the thread that you were working on, but wanted to really dig deeper. I didn't get a chance, and I know you said 1.7 is going to be deprecated, not supported, but I think it probably would be a good exercise for me to just try to understand different pieces of it. One question I have is, um, and I really didn't look into it very much, but if you were to run the tests on different versions of Kubernetes, um, is there an environment variable you set locally, or are there separate set of tests specifically to trigger to spin up an older version of Kubernetes? Do you know on top of your head?
Yeah, there is a file called docker.yaml. Where does that live? See if I can bring that up in the repo here for you. It's a great question. And this particular, it would take you a while to dig to figure out where that's defined.
Mhm.
So let me save you some time for when you do want to dig in.
Thank you.
And of course, we can go over it again if you have time and I'm free to pair. There's this file here called in cluster API test end-to-end config docker.yaml.
Mhm.
And this is where it defines the versions and what versions of cluster API are used in the test config.
Mhm.
And then way down here is a section, and this is real tiny on my screen, sorry, called variables. And inside here is a variable called Kubernetes version latest CI, Kubernetes version management, Kubernetes version. These environment variables here are what set most of the boundaries for the tests.
Mhm.
Some tests override these or use them differently than other tests, depending on what the test is trying to do.
Mhm.
So right now we're looking at the main branch. So you see that it's the Kubernetes version management set to 132 and Kubernetes version is set to 132. That means for tests that don't override these values, they will stand up 1.32 clusters.
Mhm. Okay.
Um, and then there's some stuff for latest CI and upgrade to. Some of the tests have this idea of I want to test the latest version of the continuous integration release of Kubernetes. I don't know all the history there, but you'll
Mhm.
see like CI latest 133 that usually this version will point to the absolute latest version of Kubernetes that's not even released yet, just the
Mhm.
latest cut on the CI that it will use for some of the tests. And those are specifically tests looking to see if anything new in Kubernetes breaks cluster API.
Mhm.
So you see right here, it says CI slash latest dash 1.33. If we change to the release 1.7 branch, and good, same file. Sometimes the files have moved around, so I'm glad the file is the same file. You'll see here, Kubernetes version latest CI is CI slash latest dash 1.31.
Hmm.
So in the release 1.7 branch, it's using older versions for things. It's
Hmm.
the management's 1.30 and the CI that it's trying to run is 1.31.
Hmm.
And the immediate thing you think of is like, well, right there, 1.30 and then 1.31. So those don't match. But this was the same definition as it was a few weeks ago, and it was working fine.
Okay. The one thing is weird though, because just by looking at this right now, if you remember in the failed job,
Hmm.
it was saying that Kubernetes version management was not set and it was defaulting to something. I can't
Yeah,
remember what.
it is
But what I'm,
defaulting to
Mhm.
this value.
But my question is, and maybe you don't know the answer, um, where it, or how is the job run and set that it does not see that environment variable set while it is set in that Docker file?
Oh,
So
so
what I'm
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
say is that
yeah.
I think it's getting all that information from somewhere else. Yes, for local tests, maybe we do use that Docker file, but I don't know if it's the same source as where the actual CI job is running.
Yeah, let
Do we
me
know that's the case?
I'm pretty sure it is being set correctly, and I'm gonna show you where I believe it's defined. Oh, here it is. Here's the file I wanted. All right, so here we have on the test infrastructure repo in the main Kubernetes project,
Hmm.
we have the definition for cluster APIs periodic prow jobs. These are all the CI and end-to-end tests that it
Hmm.
runs regularly for us on a schedule. So in here, um, is it 1.7 or is it 1.7? How is that defined in here? Uh, release dash one. Oh, it's in a separate job. Um, 1-7 periodics. All right. And then down here, we have conformance. No, that's not the one. We want the one that's latest. Yeah, here's the one. So this is where it's defined. Um, So this is where overrides of some of those environment variables can be done on a prow job
Hmm.
basis. And
Hmm.
this is confusing because you can have overrides at the prow level where
Hmm.
the CI job is defined, overrides in that Docker file, that
Hmm.
docker.yaml, and then the test itself as it's defined can override these values as well.
Hmm. No,
So
that's fair. But I assume that this one is the one that takes the highest priority. So if you had the value somewhere in the Docker file and is different from this one here, this is the one that it will
it should be.
take.
It would
Okay.
depend on how the test is defined to either use it or just throw away the environment variable. This
Okay.
one is defined to use it. And now I got to go back to. I had the 1.7 repo open. I wanted to show you the actual code where that is. Shoot.
So if it's not passed in the job definition here,
The
you will
default is
see
to pull
that
it from that,
message. Yeah, it says that, oh, it's not defined, so it's using the default value, blah, blah, blah.
which it populates from that docker.yaml file.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's the default values for most things.
Okay. Okay, makes sense. Okay, now I can connect it
Da-da-da-da.
together. And you did see that there was no change in any of these recently in the
Right.
CI.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's it doesn't make sense that it just started failing, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's debugging CI jobs for you. That's how it goes. Um,
Yeah.
so if I go to test and then we go to
Uh, well,
yeah.
while you're looking at it, is there a way that while the test is running, we could actually
Oh,
see?
here we go.
Oh.
Here's how we can know. Yeah, so Kubernetes version. So it's setting the Kubernetes version value and it's choosing to set it to the end-to-end config get variable of Kubernetes version latest CI. So here's the test specifically says
Mhm.
I want to pull in the latest CI version for the Kubernetes version because if other so yeah, this is how it's choosing to override it. So this test uses this variable, Kubernetes version, which
Mhm.
if it didn't set this here, based on what we saw in the file, would default to 1.30. Instead, the
Okay.
test is overriding it to be the latest CI version,
Yeah.
which you saw turns in that weird text string of CI latest 133. And I will
Mhm.
just tell you and save you a bunch of time there is code elsewhere in the test library to turn that CI latest 1.31 into an actual version number that it can use.
Okay. So complicated.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So I wanted to ask if you get to see the job running live at the moment, is there a place on Prow or somewhere that you can see the actual value for those environment variables while the test is running?
Not that I
So
know of. No.
okay.
So that's why run them locally so that I can follow those
Yeah.
things along with like a debugger
Yeah.
or something.
But you couldn't replicate it locally,
I
right?
couldn't replicate it locally. All the
Okay.
environment variables looked right to me.
Yeah.
Satyam, you got your hand up. What's going on?
Yeah, a quick question on that. So
Yeah.
can we investigate where those Docker images are pushed while those CIs run, and then exec into that Docker image and really check that environment variable?
Not
Is
to
it
my knowledge, no, because that would be on the EKS Prow clusters that we don't have administrative access to.
all right? Okay.
I don't have access to the CI runners to get on them. Maybe somebody in the SIG testing group has that, but I'm not aware of anybody, or I'm not aware of that being a thing we're allowed to do.
Yeah. And exactly, I wanted to
It's a
say, I
big
assume they've
security
all
issue.
given. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we would have to escalate and get a lot of people involved and would need to be worth that effort. But maybe I'm wrong. We can bring it up next week or at the main meeting later today, but I don't think that's something we're allowed to do for debugging.
Yeah, and as you said, this is a version that's not going to be supported, so I assume it's going to be a challenge to get access to debug such thing.
That's my assumption, but
Yeah.
I don't really know. So, I guess we could ask. That's going to be hard to to get on the job and time it all correctly too. Um, it would be technically doable. I think what I've seen in the logs to me indicates that all the environment variables are set correctly. So I haven't seen evidence that the environment variable is set wrong.
I mean,
We could
we
maybe
say that, but
go
it
ahead.
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't
If
make sense,
it's
yeah. But like none of the code changed and none of the input variables changed.
yeah, that's odd.
So one thing we could do, and this is where I think the fact that it's 1.7 would result in us deciding not to do it, we could improve the logging of this job to have more output of environment variable values so that we could debug it on future runs without needing to be on the cluster. That's within our purview. So like if we wanted to improve this test and submit a PR and just have more logging of variables so that we could see how it's breaking, I think that's a thing that they would have no trouble with us doing. But I don't think that that's going to get pushed for 1.7 just because nobody wants to touch it.
Yeah, but I think that's a good suggestion in general because it can happen in the future for another going to be deprecated version as well, right?
Right. Um, my only issue is, and maybe if you guys see one that makes sense, I'm not aware because, like I said, everything looks like the environmental variables are set correctly based on the logs I'm seeing. So I'm not sure where to add that extra logging, but if you guys have an idea that looks like, hey, here would be good, then yeah, make the PR. Get us a get a contribution going.
Okay, sounds good. I would
Or
like
ask
to
for
dig
help
into
and
that.
talk, make a
Yeah,
thread or something. Either works.
it's good. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else?
I don't have anything else.
No,
All right.
cool discussion though.
I gotta find my. All right, cool. Me neither. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next week on 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, and catch you then.
Thanks, guys.
Bye
See you.
bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.